Not only does she consciously choose to ignore certain consequences to retain her empowerment and her agency, but she also trusts in her ability and the ability of others to fix whatever might happen if things go wrong. Hey everyone, I'm Anya Esma, and today I felt called to share a little bit of a more private part of my psychospiritual practice with you in order to hopefully inspire or inform your path and all of the different pathways you can take and explore yourself, explore your being, and kind of build on your power. So I want to speak about archetypes. This is a part of my practice that I have not often talked about on the channel because it feels very specific. I didn't just want to do another general how you can work with archetypes video. I wanted to be a little bit more personal, a glimpse into my practice so that you can be inspired by that rather than by me just generally telling you you can do this, this, and that. You know, I just wanted to have a little more meat in this video, or veggies because I'm vegetarian, but anyways. So the basis of working with archetypes is basically a psycho-spiritual exploration of your shadow or of parts of you that are repressed, that might be denied by you, or that you may have just ignored until now, but they can benefit you in your life, in your tasks. So essentially, in connecting with archetypes, whether it is a certain goddess that you connect to, or a certain video game character, or a character from a book or from a myth, whatever you connect to, it can help you discover certain strengths and skills that this entity embodies within yourself, and basically build your skill set, build your self-awareness, and thus also integrate parts of you that you may have denied beforehand. Now, as always, this is not going to apply to everybody. Working with archetypes isn't for everybody, but I still want to share how I, as a witch, use them in order to build my power and build my self-awareness. Basically, dealing with everything that life throws at me better and more efficiently, and just be a happier person. Some of the archetypes I work with are, for example, Luna Lovegood. If you want to go into video games, I work with Bayonetta, and I also work with the goddess Persephone. So these are just some of the archetypes that I like to use in my practice. Now, in telling you about one specific archetype, I want to give you the tools also to explore which archetypes work for you and maybe change your archetypal practice to be more powerful if you already have one, because that is the essence of it. You want to empower yourself with how you engage with the archetypes and how you work with them. So this will basically be a blend between my private practice and some general advice on working with archetypes. Now let's finally get into the specific archetype that I want to talk about today. Yennefer of Vengerberg from the Witcher series. The Witcher series is a book series as well as a video game series. Now, I have only played the third video game, The Witcher 3, and also read a lot about Yennefer online, but I have not read all of the books, I have not played all of the video games. And this is the first thing I want to say. If you work with an archetype, the important part is which parts of the archetype you relate to, you latch onto, and you want to engage with. It doesn't matter whether you know every single thing about it. Of course, that's great. But sometimes, we learn things about the archetype that don't really vibe with us. And then what do you do? So focusing on the aspects that really matter to you and that mirror what is within you and can draw that out of you is important. You don't need to know every little thing about it. You can't know every little thing, especially if you choose a goddess such as Persephone or Athena. There is no way you can know everything about them because so much has been lost to history. You know, you can read all about her and still not know everything. So, of course, research your archetypes and know as much as you can about them, but don't be afraid to start working with them before you have a 100% 360-degree view of what they are and how they work. Now let's first talk about what Yennefer embodies and how these aspects relate to me. After that, we will talk about how I work with her specifically, when I use her energies, and how you can use your archetype's energies. So the first thing you should know about Yennefer is that she is a sorceress in the Witcher universe. And that being said, the Sorceress Archetype, which is basically one level above the character-focused level, that's where the general archetypes are, you know, like the sage or the hermit or the witch or the sorceress or the friendly beast. All of these general categories, she would fall into the sorceress category. Why that is because the sorceress archetype in general is a lot about power and about owning the power that you have and using it for your own good and possibly the good of others. But it does have a very egocentric and very, you know, personally powerful side to it, where you do not draw energy from without you, but within you, and use your core in order to bring about the change that you wish for. Personally, I do vibe with certain general archetypes, but when I actually work with them, I always use very specific ones. I don't just sit down and work with, you know, the sage or the queen. I would always have a more specific thing, whether it's a tarot card or a character from a book, video game, movie. I always needed to be a bit more specific and fleshed out so that I can latch onto more characteristics that define it. And so I have some source material basically that gives me inspiration of what this archetype can help me with and what it can awaken within me. And if you just have a general archetype and you have to kind of draw from all sorts of sources, Google it, read this book, read that book, watch that movie, then it's a lot more complicated than if you just focus on one character and then go from the specific to the less specific and say, oh, okay, she's the sorceress archetype, so that archetype works for me, you know? So when I specifically work with archetypes, I work with them on a character level. And of course, the sorceress also has an element of seduction to her and of beauty that she herself possibly created, as in the case of Yennefer. I will get to that later probably. So first of all, what does Yennefer embody? She embodies the mindset of acting first and thinking later if you want to achieve a goal. She can be very single-minded about what she wants to accomplish. For example, in the game, and this is kind of a spoiler, I should have probably said that in the beginning. If you care for kind of minor spoilers, I think, then you might not want to watch all of this. Either way, I will continue now. So she wants to save her not biological daughter, but kind of spiritual daughter, Ciri, because she's in trouble. She needs to be protected in Yennefer's eyes. And in trying to help her spiritual daughter, I will just call her her daughter for the sake of simplicity, even though they are not biologically related. In order to save her, she does a lot of morally questionable things, and she consciously decides not to think of the consequences that might come from those. Because she knows that if she thinks too much about what this can cause, then she might risk not doing it, not taking action. But she needs to take action in order to save and protect her daughter. So for example, at one point in the story, she has to practice necromancy, which is strictly forbidden, as in many magical traditions, and she needs an immense amount of energy to do this. And in practicing necromancy, she completely kills an entire garden that was actually created by the goddess Freya in this game. So she kills a goddess's garden in order to draw the energy to do necromancy, which is highly questionable and very problematic. And at one point she uses a magical artifact that will also help her locate and help her daughter. And the artifact brings about a storm that has the potential to bring very great devastation to a whole part of the country. So how does this apply to me? I am a very ethical person, and I don't vibe with the part about morally questionable deeds in order to achieve your goals. But what I do vibe with is the mindset to not focus on the consequences of an action too much, because I am very much the opposite extreme. I try to think everything through. I try to see every outcome that might happen. And whenever there's an outcome or a consequence that can potentially happen and I cannot stop it or control it or influence it, then I will often not act. That's problematic, whether it's about travel plans or business plans or even just making a small decision in everyday life. I have this lack of trust in my own ability to deal with all the consequences that might come with it. And that is why Yennefer's mindset is so appealing to me, because not only does she consciously choose to ignore certain consequences to retain her empowerment and her agency, but she also trusts in her ability and the ability of others to fix whatever might happen if things go wrong. And then usually things don't go terribly wrong, you know. Those examples that I gave were very harsh and just kind of to illustrate what she's like. So this degree of self-trust when it comes to making decisions and following your dreams is something that I want to embody more, and that working with her helps me bring about in myself, because it is something that I very much deny or try to suppress, that I can take action without it having horrible consequences, and that I can take action and trust that I will be able to control whatever comes of it. So this isn't about taking unreflected action. Of course, I will still reflect and I will still weigh the pros and cons, but when it comes down to it, certain fears, I just have to ignore them and I just have to move forward and either, eradicate those fears by dealing with them and looking at where they come from, or simply going past them, going outside of my comfort zone. The second thing that fascinates me about Yennefer, I've already kind of mentioned, her trust in her ability and her capability to figure out things is immense. She has a lot of self-trust, and I've just sort of been connecting with myself recently and workshopping my relationship with trust, trusting that it will be okay, that I can take action without it going horribly wrong, and that my ability as well as the way the universe works will serve and come together into the best outcome for me and for the world around me. So when you start drawing all of this power from within you and start looking at outside sources, that is when you really develop that amount of self-trust. That is also a very important part, because the sorceress's tool is mainly her own mind and her own conviction. And building that self-trust is something that I'm very much working on. A third thing that I like about the sorceresses in the Witcher series in general is their sense of community, but also solitude. So there is a society called the Sorceress Lodge where people work together, but Yennefer is not a part of this. But she still has a very good relationship with the other sorceresses. So it's a very, uplifting environment in a way where they try to support each other on the basis that they are all women and that they are all engaged in sorcery, which is in some parts of the world not accepted, and you may even be killed for it in this world. So Yennefer essentially is a very solitary and powerful being, but she has connections if she needs them. And she is also willing to help others, often in return for favors, but still, kind of cultivating a community. And I really like that aspect about her too, even though it's not what draws me to her the most. Another quite interesting thing about Yennefer is when she tries to get a djinn, which is a very powerful magical being in the Witcher universe, and she wants to use it for two things. One, she wants to see whether the connection she has with the main character of the game is actually genuine, because they are bound by a spell that a djinn spoke. And breaking that spell in her mind will allow her to see if the connection between them is actually real or if it's just the connection established by the other djinn. So this looking for deep connections is the one thing. And then the other, a very big wish of hers, was to have a child. She does have Ciri, which, as I mentioned, is kind of her spiritual daughter, but sorceresses in this universe cannot have children, and they cannot conceive children. And what I find so interesting about this is not necessarily the having a child part, because I don't want children myself, but the part that she kind of feels the urge to create. And that is something that I can definitely agree with or latch onto, this hunger for creation in whatever way, and using magic to empower your creation and to enable you really to create. Because a lot of the time I stand in my own way the most when it comes to creation. And being able to overcome these obstacles in my psyche is very related to my witchcraft and to my psychospiritual path. So it kind of ties into that as well. Now, just as a side note, this might be very inspiring to some people. It's less of a part of why I work with her, but she was born a hunchback, and she was born into a family that did not accept her at all and basically treated her like trash. And in becoming a sorceress and locating her own power, she was able to change her appearance, and she is able to, live her best fucking sorceress life. And that is still inspiring to me because I can relate to some aspects of that story, but definitely not all of them. So the main points of how and why I work with her are her self-trust in her abilities and her attitude of acting first and ignoring the consequences if it really serves her goal, and overcoming her fears of the consequences. Now let's talk about how I work with Yennefer and how I work with archetypes in general. It does depend on which archetype I'm working with, but these are just some practices that you can either try yourself, maybe you are doing them already, maybe they will inspire you. And yeah, I don't do this with all of my archetypes. It really depends on how deep my connection with them is. So the first thing I do is actually astral travel, bring myself into a state of meditation, and then seek an encounter with the archetype. This works best, of course, if you go in your mind into an area that they usually reside in, which means I would go into the world of The Witcher 3 and seek out Yennefer, and then converse with her, maybe even cast a spell with her. That is something that I've done in the past, and it has been immensely helpful and really, really great. So yes, you can kind of find the sorceress power within you by working with certain archetypes, if you know what I mean. Now, casting spells along with archetypes or with disembodied intelligences or goddesses, can be very powerful, especially if you do it in the astral realm. Another thing I do is to regularly remind myself of Yennefer's energy. Sometimes I will need this if I really can't quite locate my own power, or I can't locate any sort of agency. It does help me when I think about what Yennefer would do. I don't know if you remember, but quite a few years ago, I feel like 10 years ago at this point, the whole "what would Chuck Norris do" meme went around the internet, and that was highly entertaining and very inspiring in its own unique way. And I feel like that sort of relates to it, because basically you just imagine what the character that you want to embody would do in your situation. That doesn't mean that you completely lose yourself. I know that that is the issue that some people have with archetypes, that you externalize parts of yourself rather than seeing them as within you. However, I don't see this as problematic, because deep down I know that all of this is a part of me and of my psyche, and that it is just a way of locating the power within me and not really drawing an energy from outside of myself. It is all contained within me, but externalizing it can sometimes help you mirror and draw out these strengths. And that, for me, is the true power of working with archetypes. So those are the main two ways that I work with her: astral travel and regularly reminding myself of her power, and also kind of taking into consideration what mindset I could take. This kind of a little bit goes into the direction of chaos magic, which I am also very drawn to, because it is about changing and shifting your mindset and shifting the paradigms within which you operate. So in the end, it really is about empowering yourself to take action, at least with this archetype. Now, if you have an archetype that you want to work with, I would very, very happily hear how you work with them, who you work with, because I feel it's so much more interesting to hear about specific archetypes and specific characteristics that people work with, rather than just a general rundown of how to work with archetypes. There are already so many great ones out there. I will actually link one by Kellyanne Maddox down below. I'm also going to link below a video that I made about the two archetypes of the High Priestess and the Sorceress a while ago, because it kind of relates to the difference between the two, how the two fit together, how they mesh, and how they diverge. And working with both archetypes can be very powerful as well. If you have two archetypes that are kind of opposites, or two halves of the same coin, two halves of the same puzzle piece, or two puzzle pieces that fit together, whichever, then yeah, it can be helpful to maybe take a look at that video as well. So that's basically all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know, because this is a bit different from what I usually do. You know, I don't talk about video games very often, and I don't talk about archetypes very often, but it is a huge part of my practice. So I wanted to go a little bit more personal here and not so general as I often tend to. So if you like this and you aren't subscribed yet, then feel free to dwell a bit longer in my domain, subscribe to me. I also have an Instagram account. I also want to let you know that once I reach 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to do a giveaway to thank all of you that are here with me, that dwell in my space, and that take an interest in me, because it really means a lot to me, and it's really, really awesome. Especially the last video I did about Harmony Nice's book. I loved hearing all of your opinions on one of the discussion points that I had. I kind of left open what my opinion was or wasn't set yet, and you guys had an awesome time in the comments just reflecting on all of the different topics and sides to this question. I will also link that video below if you want to join in on the discussion. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed that. So I immensely want to thank you for being here and for just dwelling with me, listening to me. talking with me, and I really look forward to doing a giveaway. I still have to figure out what I want to give away, so I'm not quite sure yet. But once we reach 1,000 subscribers, then I am definitely going to let you know all of the deets. Until then, have the greatest of times, the greatest of weeks, and I will see you all next time.